Hello and welcome to this free episode of TF. It is me, Riley, in studio with Hussein.
What's up?
Being joined by Alice from Glasgow.
Hi.
And, of course, also, as always, being joined by Julian and Annie from QAnon Anonymous. Julian, Annie, how's it going?
Hi, thanks so much for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's up? I finally made it instead of sleeping in or something stupid like that.
Yeah, Julian's been running to get to the podcast recording with a piece of toast in his mouth for a year and a half now.
I like how you said "as always." You've been on every other recording. You just haven't said that much. You know.
That's
yeah.
I did QAnon Anonymous recently, and they and I was on as always. By the way,
yeah,
go check out that episode. It was an update of my Prospera obsession because some stuff has changed.
I cannot guarantee it'll be out by the time people hear this, but it will eventually be out, and people should definitely check it out.
At some point, you can hear me talk more about Prospera as I drive Julian and Travis a little bit more insane than usual. However, we have a very fun episode for you today where if you're listening to it on the day it comes out, some of us will still be in Berlin, so do factor that into your reactions to the episode.
I'm not sure how that would factor, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. Do they have to get on drugs to hear people in Berlin? Like, is it a frequency?
Yeah, you need to really slow it down. But we've got a few fun things to talk about today. Mostly, we're going to be talking all about getting an in-depth understanding of the nature and origins of all of this 15-minute cities malarkey that I'm hearing so much about from Right Said Fred. And actually, Annie, you were at the anti-walkable neighborhood demonstration in Oxford recently, weren't you?
That's right, yeah. No, I personally can't stand the idea of being able to reach everything outside in my neighborhood within 15 minutes. So I went down to demonstrate myself.
And by coincidence, ran into a couple of dozen other people who are also there to do the same thing.
Yeah, they're all united by the idea that you should go to the Morrisons an hour away because it's different. There's different stuff there.
Yeah, we have to have a militant sort of extreme movement for Big Tesco.
Well, you know what that's a militant extreme movement for is taking approximately 1 hour journeys in your car. Where guess what you're listening to? You're listening to the free one on the way there. What are you going to listen to on the way back? The paid one.
It's all synergy. We're screwing our own business model here.
That is a good point. We should actually be advocating for 1 hour 20 to 35 minute cities, depending on.
Because like, if you tried to listen to this podcast on like riding a bike, like in a British city, you would be killed. 100% fatality rate, no question about that.
And it would be legal. It'd be legal to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, not a jury in the world would convict you. But before we get into talking in depth about 15-minute cities, I need Alice. Do you have a sound alert for Twink Posting Patrol?
I really don't, and I wish I had known ahead of time because I would have ginned you up a sort of a Twink soundbite, but instead you just have sort of like regular action news.
Tennessee Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally has been liking and commenting on
the guy who does the atlases. Yeah,
the guy. Yeah, Randy McNally from the Map Store, and also let's just say a case study in nominative determinism has been liking and commenting on a young man's Instagram page for an extended period of time.
Yeah, he's a remarkable young man.
I'm breaking out all of my vintage Derek Mackay material for this. I fully expect to see some DMs that are like, 3 in the morning, 3:02 in the morning, 3:05 in the morning, just like, hey, hi, hey.
So have either of our illustrious guests, have you seen some of this breaking Randy McNally material?
Yeah, this is democracy in action. This is somebody, just reaching out to his constituents to like their, half-nude bathroom selfies. I gotta say, he's a hero and a champion and a good conservative.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, let him cook, is my opinion, because they had the funniest fucking statement about this, which is, he gets caught on his like official account. I don't even want to say caught because he wasn't being secret about it. It's his like official account with the office portrait on there, just sending like a heart emoji to this, sort of like shirtless twink. I'm just like, yeah, okay. But what they say about it is, sometimes he doesn't always use the right emoji. What emoji was he going to send that would have made that a sort of a normal interaction?
He could have sent like the in pain face as well, like or he could have sent the or what if he sent the guy with his arms crossed, like, not for me, thank you.
Just sending sort of like confusing emojis to the twinks, City skyline.
Yeah, just sending the bus emote to the twink.
Avocado.
Yeah. Okay.
Whomst among us has not been tempted to message a Catboy to just tell them they're doing great?
Yeah. Well, this is actually what Lieutenant Governor McNally replied to the picture of this twink, saying, "Great picture, Finn. Best wishes for continued health and happiness."
He's like a football coach.
I mean, that kind of sounds like he's like a confused elderly relative.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Now, the young man is nude in this picture.
But
it's 100%.
like Warrior Male, he's like a wrestling coach or something. He's like broadly supportive, doesn't really get it, just happy to see young men being athletic.
Oh God. Okay, I've seen like some more.
I mean,
there's like one where the guy where Finn is takes a picture and like you can see Finn's butt. It's a very nice picture, like aesthetically. And Lieutenant McNally responds with free heart emojis and free flame emojis. You can't at that point you can't like say I used the wrong emojis.
Yeah.
You can't use the thing of like I was trying to bookmark it.
You did it 3 times.
I was trying to bookmark
also,
it, and yeah.
He meant to say 3 fax machine emojis, a plane taking off, the Japanese flag, and like 100 thing.
Maybe he just meant to suggest that this twink was capping, and he wanted to send the cap emoji.
Yeah, sure.
Yo, you don't have an ass like that. That's cap.
He just understands the heart emoji to mean like loving support, and that's all he's doing.
For the statement to make sense, it would have to be that like if you have a government position, you automatically follow everybody in your jurisdiction or whatever. Like you don't. No one forced you to follow someone on Instagram. It's. I really doubt that this just came up. Other than like this horrible new thing where they've TikTokified Instagram and they're showing you your kind of like worst attention vices. Like they're feeding you back whatever it is.
Yeah, this guy's
and
seeing
in this
like
case they're just
Subway
twinks.
Surfers, Family Guy clips all at the same time.
It's all just twinks, and he's finding them through that.
I like this idea that you've come up with here. I think we should do this. I think you should have to follow everyone in your constituency, because that would put every single legislator who uses social media at all in brain prison. And
I agree. Yeah, I think politicians deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely.
They all deserve really big social media following.
And you have to You have to like every one of your constituents' posts as well.
And you have to pick the right emoji for it. Right?
You have to expand every image. You have to watch every video the whole length.
If I don't get at least 10 emojis from my local MP, I'm voting green.
This is the first plank of the movement for Big Tesco. Our first demand, all MPs must be made to consume all social media made in their constituency.
Yeah, you not only that, you have to reply with 3 relevant and clever emoji, right? David Lammy, you're on notice. You haven't been replying to nearly as many of my posts with emojis. But before we move on, here's what the Lieutenant Governor Rand McNally, the Lieutenant Governor of Maps, has said. His representative have said. Does he always use the proper emoji at the proper time? Maybe not. But he enjoys interacting with constituents and Tennesseans of all religions, backgrounds, and orientations on social media and has no intention of stopping.
He's just like me.
Yes.
He's just like me.
I will continue sending the fire emoji to the twink. And I will not be... I guess that's the only thing you can do.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Finally a right-wing politician I can respect.
I've not looked up any of his views. I assume they're very regular.
He's a lieutenant governor. Who cares? Like, his views do not matter unless Bill Lee gets shot. No one cares what this guy thinks. And if he does, it's going to be the funniest possible American assassination because it's going to precipitate this guy being governor of Tennessee and just sitting in the office all day sending heart emojis to twinks.
Yeah, and then what's going to happen is that Finn, that particular twink, is going to be like put in charge of like the Tennessee State Senate.
Yeah, this guy could be gay Huey Long. Like, he absolutely could. And I'm sad that we're missing out on that opportunity.
All right. So there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is a little bit of, I'd say, an advanced discussion of what we're going to talk about in much more detail on next week's free episode, which is the UK's ongoing decision to continue hardening its borders and criminalizing migrants and so on. But which we're going to talk about again in depth and so on, and on that episode.
Yeah, we're going to talk about like the actual policy, but first we have to do the sort of dessert before the vegetables. We have to talk about the silly bullshit that everyone else is talking about instead of the policy.
So this is footballer and social media poster. I haven't seen him respond to a twink on Instagram, but we just don't know yet.
Guy whose career actually has succeeded despite the fact that he shit himself on the pitch.
Yeah, that's right.
I think he's the only guy to shit himself
absolutely.
and for that to have worked out for him. So
yeah, an inspiration to like people with IBS everywhere. I would say not national hero, not really national treasure, national guy, guy who's around.
Yeah, a national guy who sticks around. Gary Lineker has essentially said that the continued demonization of asylum seekers to the UK, who I must always remind everyone who will listen at this point, who are coming to the country legally, again, not that should really matter, but who are coming to the country legally, and the only reason they have to cross in small boats is because, for example, there is a European-level regulation that we're still party to that means that if someone gets on a plane and flies to a destination and are denied entry at that destination, the airline is responsible for paying to fly them elsewhere. Right? So if you want to know one of the reasons that people keep arriving in small boats, that's a fucking big one of them. Right? So
yeah, Dublin too, right?
Yeah. So anyway, Gary Lineker has he tweeted something just saying, wow, this is pretty reminiscent of 1930s Germany, this wave of dehumanization of migrants that is let's say getting bigger and more prominent and it's gone from comment sections of papers to the headlines to the halls of government. And it's not new. It's been in all of these places forever, but that it is sort of getting bad and worse recently.
Yeah. And the Nazis weren't, they're not the comparison I would have made, not because of any sort of like moral compunction about making it, just because I think it's like slightly imprecise, but he wasn't wrong. Like, it is dehumanizing, it is genocidal, sure, all of these things.
And the reason to bring this up is the usual thing happens when someone who's associated with the BBC says something that the government is doing is wrong, which is the usual crop of 200 syphilitic columnists, all of whom live in inner London, then get all very up in arms about it. However, what I noticed this time is that he was then doorstepped. He was this guy, and again, I have no particular love for Gary Lineker. I mean, he's someone who's
just a sort of like he's a regular lib. Like, well, this is the thing. Like, he's tweeted stuff that's like seemed to violate the BBC's like standard of like impartiality before, right? Like he talked about like, oh, you got to bin Corbyn. He like congratulated Boris on winning, and it's like, oh, okay, so those are fine. But we're doing the full court press on like, no, you cannot be involved in politics as like a BBC sports presenter for this thing specifically.
Yeah, and the idea that again, a guy who's a private citizen would end up be unable to walk out of his house because a gaggle of fucking Sky News or whatever cameras are just trying to get him to either admit he was wrong or get him to like apologize or whatever. This is the doorstepping from our media class as a form of social boundary enforcement is being directed against more and more and more and more people.
I don't think it's even about getting like him being forced to make an apology or even about his BBC job. I feel like those are sort of side issues. The main thing at this stage, and like especially considering that, like from what I understand, and I'm sure we'll talk about this like next week, But from what I understand of like the kind of Tory policy that's being proposed, most of that can't actually be actioned, right? So
no, it's wildly illegal,
right? Like it's kind of a bit. It's a bit too illegal for their liking. So the idea is much
Yes.
more like you propose like the most kind of insane and villainous shit, and then when most of that gets rejected, you can then kind of blame the cabal of like enemies that incorporate like European institutions that you're sort of still signed up to, but technically Brexit should have made you free from them, etc. All the people that supported Brexit, like, and that would include Lineker, all these sort of celebrities that
sorry, you supported Remain, you mean?
Well, yes, sorry. Yeah. My apologies to Gary Lineker. I will shit myself after this to say sorry. But I guess like the idea of like creating this kind of like new bubble or expanding that bubble of like enemies that want to that are just like against the government agenda, which is now sort of all being concentrated around anti-migrant sentiment, because really that's all they seem to have left, right?
Well, Suella Braverman she had to apologize for this. She was forced to by the like one of the civil service unions and say, oh, actually, I didn't see this before it was sent out under my name. But she had an email to like Tory party members that's like, the reason why we can't do the like stop the boats bill that we want to do is because of an activist blob of like left-wing civil servants, human rights lawyers, judges. And so
and then it ends with, you know what to do, big comical wink.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And also, you know what else that is? That just replace all of that. You scratch that. You know what's under it? The words printed in impact font, cathedral. There is the cathedral
absolutely.
that is stopping us from implementing the wonderful idea that we all decided was great in the bazaar. But the thing that I wanted to sort of pull out about this as well is that increasingly the acceptable role of broadcast media in the UK, especially when it pertains to the BBC, and this is one that's sort of, again, hardcore enforced by the right and then nodded along to by liberals, is that they're there to be the arbiters of culture war. And they are there to be
and like,
the referees,
of course,
essentially.
Yeah, and referees in a sort of a very, as I've said, like hypocritical and like
they're supposed to be the referees at a Harlem Globetrotters game. Like that is
yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I agree with Hussein in that I don't think this is really about Gary Lineker, because he's in a position where he's been in this job for like fucking 25 years or whatever. He has like infinity money. He could go and do this anywhere else. It's about sort of disciplining anyone else who might think about sticking their head up over the parapet to go like, he might be able to do it. You do not want this. You don't want us outside your house.
I don't know. It felt sort of like government by trolling in some kind of strange way when Rishi Sunak came out and like with that podium, which literally had "stop the boats" on it. And then they like posted that tweet, which was just like, if you come here illegally, you will be exempt from our slavery protections and things like that. Do you know, like it felt like what a government done by someone like Paul Joseph Watson or something would look like, do you know, where it's just like designed to be as malicious, as crass, as kind of like vicious as possible. And I think, they wanted that response. And that's not to be like, oh, you're just playing into their hands by being like morally outraged, because that's not really how I think about it. I think it's morally outrageous. And so, of course, people were going to be morally outraged, But I think it's exactly right that they were looking for somebody that they could point to as woke, BBC, out of touch, lefty, and kind of make a fuss about. So Suella Braverman and Sunak and everyone else like that can go back and say that they were betrayed. They were betrayed by the snowflakes in the ECHR, the woke BBC, all the rest of it. I don't. And as Hussein says, it feels like a kind of desperate move. It does feel desperate, but of course that doesn't mean it can't cause untold misery while they flail around.
I was like very quickly, just kind of like to add that I think this is also sort of setting ground for what will be a sort of, I don't know how long it'll be in opposition, but I think it's very telling that the Labour response to all this was not like, no, this is morally kind of wrong.
Yeah.
And, of course we're not going to fucking like send people, like allow people to become slaves in this country. Their thing was like, oh, actually, we're not really sure about the effectiveness of this. So ultimately, it's like, it doesn't really matter whether they're in government or not. Like, now that this has kind of been like set on the table as a kind of like legitimate political, not even like a legitimate political framework, because that's kind of always been the case. But it basically has now set the terms of like what any kind of future response to refugee crises is going to be. And, I think that for like an incoming Labour government, like we all know it's not really going to change anything. But I guess what I'm worried about is that as that now has sort of been established, what you'll see is a Labour government who are like, we're going to take the sort of philosophical principles of this and decided like make it efficient.
Yeah, it's like you're not going to benefit from our modern slavery protections unless you work at a company making an app. So I want to move on to, and we'll talk about this obviously much, much more fully in our episode next week.
Both next week and, in a couple of years' time when we talk about how Prime Minister Starmer has managed to put stopping the boats on the blockchain or whatever.
Yeah, of course. So let's get to our main course for today, which is, of course, a deep dive into the 15-minute cities thing. Now, we've talked about it a little before, but we're gonna go much further in. So Julian and Annie, I was hoping, could you just spend a couple of minutes giving us a little bit of an update on the state of the big conspiracy that conspiracy people now kind of all believe in little facets of?
Yeah, sure. So the 15-Minute City Club is a club which local councils can sign up to.
It's really difficult to get in. The bouncers like quite sort of fussy about outfits.
Yeah, if you think the queue at Berghain is bad. And yeah, they sign up to this club. And it's so mild. It's so hilariously mild. Essentially, what they do when they sign up to this club is that they promise to think really hard about being a 15-minute city when it's time to invest in some infrastructure or build a new road or anything like this. It's so non-binding. They essentially just promise to, think about the 15-minute city principle, which is that when somebody goes to their doctor's or their school or their grocery shop, they should be able to do that within 15 minutes walk or cycle. So lots of councils have just signed up to this. Like, that does sound nice. That sounds like a nice idea, essentially. But this has become reframed through the conspiracy theory surrounding the Great Reset. And it's theorized by the kind of adherents of the anti-Great Reset movement that this is actually a trap which councils are setting setting in thrall to Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset and the WEF and everything like that, which is that these 15-minute cities will be enforced. So they're going to apportion up all of their cities into 15-minute zones, and you won't be able to leave your zone without a permit of some kind. So it's a kind of science fiction dystopian concept coming out of this very mild council proposal.
Yeah. So
imagine living in 2023 and having to make up science fiction dystopian scenarios. You keep getting handed real ones, and you're just like, no, this isn't exotic enough for me. I need the one where I'm sort of locked into City 17.
Well, I need the one that curtails as a radicalized middle-aged homeowner, I need the science fiction dystopia that I'm not just aware of, or that's not sort of imminent and all around me. I need the one that impinges on the main ways in which I interact with the world, which is driving to the shop.
I think that's exactly it. Yeah, it's a very bourgeois conspiracy theory because a lot of it relies on people who live in the suburbs, who own their own home and who drive everywhere. A lot of people I spoke to were, explaining to me how, it may seem very sudden that we're suddenly all going to be shut in our homes, but it's actually only part of the creeping anti-car agenda, which has been going on for a long time.
and in fact,
I do have one of those. I just wish politicians did too.
Yeah.
It's so strange. There's this kind of And we talk about this sort of like more or less every time we get you guys on. But I think there's this weird sort of cultural whiplash effect that happens where if you go from everything the government does, all of the policy is designed to like shield you as a population from like everything, whether that's, you know, being a homeowner, being a motorist, you know, being middle class, whatever, to like experiencing some effect, like sort of feeling the wings of government sort of like brush past you. It really, really sends you in the opposite direction. And you're like, oh, this is tyranny. Tyranny is happening to me.
And so what we have there's a few examples, right, of a lot of various initiatives to fight climate change by just trying to discourage people from using their cars, right, that are completely have created these enormous street protests of usually people who aren't even living in the cities. Like the idea is that Oxford was the epicenter of the UK protest against it, but there's also protests in Edmonton, Paris, Brussels, all over the shop.
Yeah, it's so strange. You would think that they had like seen my posts about like climate Stalin, but then you look at what they're actually mad at, and the answer is like a working paper that's like, maybe you could ride a bicycle.
Yeah.
And it's got like a little drawing of a sun on it, you know?
What I find so funny about this as well is like Europe, like every city in Europe, or most of them, especially in Northern and Western Europe, is a 15-minute city and has been since like 1200.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, well, I think Oxford is a really interesting example for this, because Oxford is obviously a couple of weekends ago where the protests were. And you're right, it was, you know, even though Oxford was just one of many councils that have joined the 15-minute club, the reason it was chosen for the protest was because the local council is implementing something which are actually nothing to do at all with the 15-minute cities or even climate change. They're doing some traffic filters, which essentially means that there are 6 main roads that run into the city centre of Oxford. And I think from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m, starting 2024, cars, unless they have a permit, won't be able to go on those during, from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. But it's all entirely to do with traffic, because Oxford obviously is built around the Oxford colleges, which have been around since around 1096, and it's just frankly not built for that many cars. Do you know? It's all these medieval little cobbled streets. The traffic is really bad there. It's really horrible. So it's just like, I don't know. Yeah, it's not even, you know, the kind of, this was combined with the 15-minute cities to say, you know, this is exactly what they're doing. They're starting the climate lockdowns. They're starting the climate lockdowns here. But it wasn't even anything to do with climate change. It was just, I guess, the tension which is at the heart of nearly all local politics in the UK, which is, you know, our cities aren't built for cars. Suddenly everybody has a car. How do we like make this not a fucking nightmare without upsetting anyone? But of course, this has been a tension at the heart of local councils. Where I live, Norwich, they just pedestrianised the whole city centre, which was immortalised by Alan Partridge 50 years ago. But it seems like now you can't do something like that. You can't make a change like that without somebody deciding that this means you want to enslave them and control them and all the rest of it.
Every sort of like obstacle that you face as a motorist, that's Klaus Schwab.
That's Klaus
Schwab. You can't find a parking
exactly.
space, that's the World Economic Forum.
Well, he's putting like orange cones everywhere. He's putting the arrow in the wrong direction. It's like very fun, but it's actually like
traffic prankster Klaus Schwab.
Like this is so. I'll explain, like, because you were going to say something, and then I'll.
Go ahead.
I was just like the suburban driver thing is like really fascinating to me, because I come from a place, like I live in Greater London, and I feel like in Greater London you have that tension between people who want public transport and are very happy when they get it, in the case of like where we are with like the Elizabeth line and everything, but also people who were fucking furious about it because they felt that this train line, which was not like, it was just an extension of the existing train station, but because there was like big protests about it when it first kind of was proposed back in 2015, because they were worried that it would disrupt their car commutes, right? And I think since like the development of that, like I've seen sort of car politics in that area kind of go in these really, really strange directions. And it comes from like protests over roadworks, for example. You know, the one, I think a couple of years ago, I saw someone when I was driving to my parents' house, like, and they live in kind of more of the suburban Kent. They like stopped their car in the middle of the road, got out, took the cones away from the road that is being like worked on, and just drove past. And it was bizarre to me to see, but it like that sort of tendency. And I guess one of the questions that I had for you guys and for you, Annie, because like you were in Oxford, how much of this is just kind of like people with cars for whom they kind of believe that the car is the only thing that sort of gives them a semblance of freedom. And so any obstruction to it, whether that's like an LTN or whether that's like a temporary traffic light, is kind of a violation of their freedom. And how much of this are people who kind of are a little bit annoyed about the whole car thing, but for them it like feeds into this much broader, more sinister agenda that they have sort of been kind of like swooped into and had already signed up to begin with.
I spoke to, probably about like 20, 25 people when I was there at the protest. And there was precisely one woman at the end who appeared to be local, had no interest in the Great Reset or the WEF or anything like that. She just thought traffic filters were really bad.
Right.
Do you know? She like, and it was so strange speaking to her because, you know, she was just giving me just the completely ordinary local politics spiel. She was just saying, you know, I work as a mobile hairdresser. This is going to make my, you know, commute to my various clients so much harder. I'm going to have to go round on the ring road. It's going to be terrible. And I was just totally ill-equipped to actually engage with her concerns because I'd just been speaking to
but what a close
everybody
Schwab.
else. Yeah,
Are you worried
exactly.
about him? Also, I could actually ask about that as well. How did she react to being in the same protest with like the fucking like British National Party or inheritor organization, a National Action, I think, no, Patriot Front was there, right? Yeah. How would someone like that react to being like, how come everyone here seems very right wing?
Yeah, I mean, once I realized what was going on, that she wasn't a conspiracy theorist. I mean, you can hear our conversation. I should have mentioned this to begin with. I've recorded an episode about this for QAnon Anonymous, which will be up on our premium feed. So you can go and listen to our conversation there. But yeah, I really wanted to suss out what she must be feeling about all of these signs, you know, saying stuff like, we're not going to eat the bugs, you know, this is a communist ghetto, all the rest of it. So I sort of said, it must feel really nice that how many people have come to support you from all over, from no one here is actually from Oxford, right? So I was like, that must feel nice. And she was like, oh, well, you know, they've all got their agendas, don't they? Lots of people talking about the vaccine. Well, I've had my jab, so and I was, I said, you know, does this not concern you that the council will just turn around and say, well, a bunch of conspiracy theorists oppose it, but nobody with any actual complaint? And she sort of seemed a bit like nonplussed by that. She was like, yeah, I suppose they could say that. But then she brought up the fact that, of course, because as you might point out, Riley, there were, some pretty nasty far-right organisations there. I think I saw there was someone from Patriotic Alternative and the Heritage Party, I believe, were there, all in attendance. The Heritage Party they were like stood right at the front when all the speeches were happening and talking with the organisers. So I kind of assumed they were going to do a speech, but they didn't. It was all very weird. But yeah, this meant that there was a local anti-fascist presence. And so this woman was sort of saying, you know, and of course there's anarchists who are counter-protesting us and anti-fascists, and I don't really understand what their problem is with us and why they all wear masks and stuff. I kind of just felt like, yeah, this was just like this woman who genuinely had, just one complaint about this specific bit of local politics, who had been pulled into a culture war, which was entirely beyond her understanding. Do you know?
I feel quite bad for her, just to be like, it's, you know, me and all of these Nazis against sort of Antifa, who are very keen on sort of like traffic calming measures.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
They love the ring road.
They love the ring road, yeah.
Part of the like mini roundabout block.
So I've got a few other quotes here. So this is actually from Wired magazine, talking about a local traffic calming activist in Haringey, where I live, who's been advocating for better cycling infrastructure in the borough, and as a cyclist in Haringey, thank you, and received a torrent of vitriol when she just posted a thread on what she was doing to try to make Haringey more walkable. And this is not related to, I mean, it's the same movement as Oxford, but some of the stuff you said, I thought I'd bring this in now. Because some of the tweets that are reported or copied in this thread are quite relevant. One user called Paul DUP 809775540 said, "That's not freedom. That's a socialist prison." Insert Milo doing the Northern Irish accent now. However, my favorite one was a tweet from an account called @BusinessLioness.
I want that name.
Yeah.
I want that at Business Lioness. I am willing to pay you a reasonable sum for the @Business Lioness.
Sent the activist an image of the Warsaw Ghetto with a message. There were already 15-minute cities in Poland during the Nazi occupation. In 1941, the Nazis introduced the death penalty just for going out.
Okay, there's two things that I want to really dig into here, right? The first one, the idea that the boundaries of the Warsaw Ghetto were imposed in order to stop you from going to Big Tesco, right? And you have to like stay within 15 minutes. The second thing, fucking the Fiat 500 Twitter Institute for Advanced Holocaust Studies saying that one of the Nazis' greatest crimes, they actually made it illegal to go out. That actually one of the first things that the Nazis did was institute a series of laws that forbade you from wearing a nice top and some jeans and going out with your friends. And it's just like, yeah, that's what that was.
Because one of the things that we talk about is this idea of the prison, but the idea is that you imagine yourself as persecuted as like someone in the Warsaw Ghetto in the 1930s, like a Jew in 1930s Germany or Poland, right? You imagine yourself in that way, because you've created an underdog story in which you're the hero, and the stakes are going to Big Tesco, essentially.
Well, we did live through that for a minute, right? And I always find it's very curious that, all of these people hate Matt Hancock so much. And I don't feel bad for him because he has sort of made a rod for his own back. You look at some of the texts that he's sending during the pandemic, and they're like, oh, we actually told the police to like get tough and stupid about this. And so as a result, like you saw, people, getting fined for going out on like second walks, or like the police going to like Tesco to see if they're only selling essential items or whatever. And it was legitimately authoritarian. It was very weird. It was surreal. And it was like an overreach. And so all of these people have gone, oh, well, if they can do that, they're just going to do it like again, but permanently for the sake of international socialism, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like one thing just to kind of bear up, because like there's a lot of sort of like insanity or like just kind of bizarre things, and also like lots of people exploiting that too. But I can totally understand, like, because I live around people who like have these sort of tendencies. And part of that does come from the idea that like, okay, well, when you live in like quite a remote area where there is no real public transport, where there's not really a lot of infrastructure, where there's not really a lot of stuff to do.
There's nowhere to hang out with anyone. You're just trapped in your ordinary way of living is being trapped in your house.
Also just like the things that you
going on
can,
the computer.
The things that you can do. Like my neighbor, for example, like the only thing that she ever really does is sort of like go out with her dog to like the two parks near our house. And like when the first sort of lockdown happened, one of those parks was completely closed off with like, your standard like sort of weird police tape. And the other one, like the seats were like kind of wrapped up as well, right? And so you're suddenly like you're someone who's kind of like used to a particular way of living, which doesn't really have a lot, but you've also sort of you're not really expecting that much. And so when the few things that do kind of keep your life somewhat sane are then sort of taken away from you, it's very easy, I suppose, to then kind of it's very easy to log on the computer and be like, oh, by the way, if they can do this, they can do all these other things. And like how then, especially with the Hancock stuff, how then can you kind of be like, well, 15-minute cities that are all sort of conducted outlaw or being sort of designed by the EU, like it's not kind of the thing. They're not going to like shut down the Dartford Bridge, like Bane from The Dark Knight Rises and stuff. They should though. Yeah. They should. That's all I'm saying.
One sec. I noticed. I wanted to bring Julian in because I feel like we've been having all this between ourselves, but we haven't heard from you on this subject that much.
No, this is great. I'm learning about Middle Earth and all the different races that live there. This is so cool. No, I mean, it's really funny because, here there's just, the concept of walkable anything is just not really a thing. But I think that what is kind of common between both the countries is that at this point, there's no vision for the future. Like, there's no common project, and there's zero trust that the government can take care of anybody, basically. So the only thing that people are really adamant about is, like we were mentioning earlier with the boats, it's like, can you crack down on my enemies? Because I trust that you can be cruel, but I don't trust that you could take care of a city or us in any way. And also, we've been building a sense of community around our hatred of like whatever it is, the vaccines or the lockdowns. And so now any kind of thing coming from above, from the government, is a form of lockdown. They're looking for that, right? For like, okay, well, how are you trying to control me? And I think that sense can be applied to anything. I mean, I think the 15-minute cities thing will come and go, and there'll be something new, and it'll be even more ridiculous. But the reality is, that woman at the end that you spoke to, Annie, who was from Oxford, it's kind of a double-edged thing because, I mean, there would be like 12 people, and it wouldn't make the news if there wasn't this entire carnival procession of people talking about adrenochrome and the WEF. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, local politics not spicy enough, and also no vision for future, and I think just in general, knee-jerk, no government. We don't want government doing anything, and that includes telling me I can't use my car during this hour on Tuesday and Thursday, but totally unrelated. I mean, when you hear people's discourse about this stuff, it has zero to do with the actual filters and everything to do with enslavement and this idea that the government is bearing down on us and is like the biggest government we've ever had, right?
Well, what we really is, and I think the thing that unites it all together is that all of the Great Reset conspiracies, in fact, a lot of conspiracies in general, to me, seem to be, or especially the right-wing ones, seem to be way almost like stochastic reactions to any collective action problem, right? That's stochastic reactions to public health, stochastic reactions to climate management, where someone from the Heartland Institute will tweet the phrase climate lockdown in April 2020, and then that will just keep getting amplified, and then other people paid by the Heartland Institute will keep saying, oh, climate lockdown, and then that idea is just out there. And so what happens is someone who's like, again, a sort of radicalized middle-aged person who's constantly seeing ghosts at the edge of their vision because we live in an insane information environment that they just are being driven crazy by. When they're looking to sort of explain what the ghosts they keep seeing are, they reach for climate lockdown. And then it just so happens that fossil fuel funded think tanks were the first people that created and promulgated this idea. That, in fact, some of the bloggers who then explicitly linking traffic calming measures to 15-minute cities, to eating the bugs and living in a gated, zone like from science fiction, or also have accepted Heartland Institute funding at some point in the past, Joanne Nova, right? Like, all of these people have that in common. And so, to me, it seems like a form of like stochastic informational terrorism fighting a rear guard on behalf of the energy industry to forestall climate action for just a little bit longer.
What's wild is that they want to do return, but then you don't even want to do any degrowth. Like, you don't even want to have your car taken away for like a tiny part of your week. Like, what do you think we're going to return to? Yeah, exactly. Too. I mean, if you're looking for like the kind of pastoral, fascist perfect, time of yore, I mean, it's not going to involve you taking your car all day long and going to a big supermarket.
I think that's true. It's like really anti-modernity, but in this very specific way. I mean, one of the things that came up a lot when my interviews was, I think there were three sort of like points, I guess, general points of identity and general points of anxiety. The first, a lot of them brought up, was like their disappointment that young people weren't involved with the movement, that they felt like young people didn't like particularly that some of them had hoped that because they were in Oxford, some students would come and join them, but instead students were standing on the sidelines and laughing at them. So lots of them felt quite, I think, generationally bereft.
The new Bullingdon Club are very disappointed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what is a
Some of them-
campus? The campus is a 15-minute city. What the fuck are the students supposed to do? They can't afford cars. Like, it doesn't make any none of it connects for them.
Technology was the second one. There were, just, so much kind of, anxiety and disgust around technology, around like microchipping, transhumanism. There was one woman who actually gave me a really detailed explanation on how technology made humans sick. And not only had COVID been caused by 5G, but in fact, every flu epidemic could be connected to the rollout of some new technology, going
Not
back
cars,
as far
though.
as...
Okay, cars, which by the way, like there are now laws named for children who have died because they live on like ground floor flats that are poorly ventilated near main roads in South London.
I inhaled fumes when I was a child, and I'm doing fine. Didn't do anything.
Yeah, the thing that always strikes me is how much of like an American culture or like a sort of import this is, right? And that like, if you want to be sort of a trad about this, if you want to say like, technology has made everything terrible, right? But I want to drive everywhere. That's the American kind of trad. The British kind of trad used to like bicycles. They used to imagine themselves sort of like cycling past the village green to go and see like a nice, friendly sort of like local doctor and local shops where you know everyone and stuff like that. And that's all sort of like fallen by the wayside, it seems. I think one of the reasons why is something that I sort of joked about earlier that isn't really a joke, which is, they want to make going out illegal. I think it's like a genuine crisis of like alienation and loneliness that has sort of driven these people into the arms of like really quite strange and quite foreign sort of influences.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, it's also perfect that we're talking about this the day that report happened, which that report was came out, which said that there had been like no mental health impact from the pandemic. Because I mean, I don't want to say like, that obviously I don't want to say these people are crazy or irrational, because I don't really think that's true. But almost every single person I spoke to, I would ask them nearly all at the end, how did you first find out about this? What woke you up to this? And every single one said it was over lockdown, that they had woken up to the mirage, to the lies that they were being told. And I think just like the most common radicalization story is just, I didn't like being locked down, and then I realized that COVID is fake, and now I'm starting to realize the same about climate change. Just that is pretty much how you would sum up like 90% of the radicalization stories, I suppose.
And that's one of the reasons also why a lot of the kinds of measures of mental health that would say that, there was no impact of mental health during COVID is because these people are full of energy and renewed purpose. They would say their mental health is great.
That's true, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's another thing I wanted to add as well, right? We've talked a lot about going out and how they're worried about going out, but they're also worried about what happens inside the big Tesco. Because, and this is, there was a video or post on Twitter earlier that maybe you can play a clip of. But it was, we'll play a clip over me explaining what's in it. But it is a woman walking around a store in London, Ontario, looking at I've noticed that there are little cameras over all of the freezer doors, and then saying, well, obviously, this is a facial identification camera. And when it identifies you, if you've gone over your carbon budget, if you've driven too much, it won't let you buy the meat. Right. And this is one of the other things that I think about this is that I think this is actually people dealing with their repressed guilt and anxiety about the hyperobject, about the existential terror of climate change, because this is believing that climate change ultimately, right? What you're believing in is an effective, if quite draconian, solution to climate change.
Yeah, climate Stalin. You understand that climate change is about to change your life drastically, but the only way you can interpret that happening is the government is going to like force you to live differently, rather than rather than events forcing your hand, for instance.
What he didn't realize was actually those cameras are a training exercise that is set by Mr. Beast, and he's going to put them. He's monitoring his feastables and how they're being stacked.
Mr. Beast as climate Stalin. Only he has the influence to decarbonize our economy.
Let's go, YouTube. I've just decarbonized the entire economy. I have decarbonized 220 economies today.
But I think there is there is something to be said about how, because I think that you're right about sort of the kind of reaction to it, reaction to it. But I think it also comes from what you were saying earlier about this kind of hostility towards kind of any type of collective solution, partly because I think for a lot of people, they just can't imagine what that really looks like, right? And when they sort of when there was a semblance of that during COVID, it was not only managed incredibly badly, but also there were definitely instances where it's if you're a rich person, your experience of lockdown would be very, very different to if you were not. And if you were in a kind of wealthy area, or if you were in a very comfortable area, your experiences, even of when lockdown restrictions were lifted, or your ability to sort of work at home, all these types of things were very much stratified by class. And while they may not necessarily have the language to articulate that, I do think that feeling, it was very much present, especially in a lot of places in England where, for the most part, again, unless you live in a very wealthy area of the country, that period was just very miserable and very lonely and very isolating and atomizing. And I think the idea that, my sort of good faith interpretation is that I think for a lot of people, the idea of having to do that again, but for a longer period of time, and to kind of achieve a collective goal that may not even sort of provide any benefits to you or your family, but will definitely benefit richer people more. I can understand where that animosity then comes from.
Well,
I have a very dumb policy prescription for this very quickly, which is, you'll love this. It's the most Alice thing you could possibly think about this, which is people want a bit of sort of emotional fucking support. They want a bit of coddling. They need it, right? We all do. Do you remember that ad that came out? It was the German Public Health Authority at the start of the first lockdown that was we heroically did nothing. We sat on our asses and stayed inside. I genuinely believe that if you gave everyone who sat through lockdown without getting a fine or something a little medal, we would not be nearly as messed up about it. But we just didn't. We just sort of went, okay, it's over now. Back to normal, I guess.
People want little treats, and instead what they got was just okay, well, you're going to be miserable during lockdown, but also when restrictions are lifted, despite the fact that the virus is still around and it's still causing people to die, and we basically did nothing to mitigate it, you're now going to have a miserable time having to go back to work to save the economy.
Yeah. And also there might be more lockdowns in future. We don't know. We're a bit confused about it. But there was no recognition. We barely recognized people who actually did stuff, like NHS workers, let alone people who did what they were supposed to do and stayed home and just sort of
Alice,
absorbed it.
That's not fair. We spun that boat around.
Well, all I'm saying is that perhaps if ordinary people had had a boat spin, that would have helped sort of forestall a lot of this conspiracism.
No, I genuinely think that might be spot on, Alice. I don't know, there was no real kind of heroism, was there? There was no real valor in much of this. And I think you're completely right that people instead have created a story which we keep on saying how science fiction it sounds, but there's a reason for that, right? And that's because that's a story of heroism that people can understand, of going up against the dystopian system. I heard lots of people talking about Klaus Schwab, and they would often refer to him as they were talking. They're he's like a James Bond villain, or he's like a comic book villain or something like that. And you're yeah, that's exactly right, because this is the story you want to tell about yourselves. It's about the underdog against, the evil totalitarian system, which is, it's a cracking story. It's a reason we tell it over and over again. Do you know?
And this is also why I think we get so many comparisons to the Nazis, because, Annie, I don't know if you ran across anything from...
I would have fought in the war, but I wasn't, instead of that, I got to, I had my war, which was against traffic calming measures.
And I had my war, which was where I fought the battle of going to the shops and then buying as much meat as I want, thank you very much. But I think
we forfeited so much. We forfeited a narrative on this, which governments had the capacity like no one else to build, of going, this was a collective sacrifice that we all made, right? And that we acted together in order to keep ourselves safe. And by and large, we did a very good job. And instead, we just went, back to work. The commercial landlords are very worried about this, so back to work now, please.
Take 10 pounds off at Nando's and get an extra COVID.
You don't even get that anymore.
Exactly.
That was even short-lived. You don't even... But the price has gone up for stuff. I went to Nando's the other day because I was waiting for for Milo and Phoebe's live show. And I was really hungry. One of the only places that was open was Nando's. The price, fuck me, man.
So before we end, I want to talk.
I want a medal for that.
We all get a medal for dealing with inflation. Before we end, I want to talk about one other character, and this is why I talked about the Nazi comparison earlier. Not just the ones that we saw from Business Lioness, but Jeremy Mogford, the owner of the Old Bank Hotel in High Street and the old Parsonage Hotel in Banbury Road, where I celebrated my graduation with my parents, has admitted that he was guilty of, quote, over-dramatizing the cause of Oxford traffic fillers after he sent the following email about Oxfordshire Green County Councillor Andrew Gant.
Oh, God.
This man Gant, along with his associates, are Joseph Mengele equivalent. Experimenting with our people and our city without knowing what the consequences might be, which could and probably will be terminal. It's
I mean, one thing when I was explaining the 15-minute cities in Oxford to Julian and our other QAnon Anonymous hosts was, I hadn't exactly realised this, but as far back as December last year, Oxford County Council were having to put out joint statements with the county and the city council saying, please stop sending us death threats. Do you know, they did a joint statement which said that, it was probably it was a bit of a public relations nightmare, and it's exactly how you shouldn't actually respond to a conspiracy theory, where it's just two of them stood in front of the camera we're not doing climate lockdowns. You're not going to be locked in your home. We're not going to build walls that segregate neighborhoods. And you're like, oh God, well, this will only kind of fuel it. But yeah, I hadn't really realized, I guess, because I first heard about these lockdowns, these protests happening a couple of months ago. I guess I hadn't really realized quite how long that rumor had been going around and how long it had been being stoked by the likes of GB News as well. GB News, I guess it's a bit like what you were talking about with the climate lockdowns being a concept in need of a policy, right? And so I guess this was just the first one that all of these pundits saying climate lockdowns could finally say, this is it, this is what it is. But yeah, no, the poor councillors, it's just, it's really not worth it.
And we say a concept in need of a policy. When I said earlier that it's a fossil fuel industry concept, no, it literally is. The people who came up with the climate lockdown idea and then kept going on Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and stuff to push it, and to create those clips that go on social media that then get fact-checked and responded to by Snopes or The Guardian or whatever, saying there is not going to be a climate lockdown. All of that is it's all from people literally paid by the fossil fuel industry through the Heartland Institute to do this. That's what you want to know where the idea comes from. It's not just, the idea doesn't come from the sort of, radicalized middle-aged homeowner who sees ghosts in their vision and tells the fun story. It comes from the fossil fuel industry, and then it's just there waiting to attach to something.
Yeah, and it's sort of it's very useful to a lot of middlemen in a lot of ways. if you're, you can do sort of very well off of this if you're the admin of a Facebook group where people can watch videos where it's like climate lockdowns in China, and it's a video of a guy trying to buy a Twix from a vending machine, and then 6 guys in boiler suits like tackle him through a plate glass window or whatever. That's sort of quite rewarding, both in terms of like clout and financially. So yeah, it's this whole like weird sort of sick ecosystem, which has some very sort of like goes to some very dark places.
All right, so I think that we're probably in a pretty good place. We put a few interesting and horrifying buttons on this topic. Once again, Annie and Julian, you guys want to sort of provide us any final thoughts on the issue?
I think one thing that is interesting to me is just, in the same way that the whole NHS question has been progressing, is that, like you said, you have these kind of people who are beholden to private interests that want us to consume and want to deregulate all these things, and also want to gut and privatize, the social safety net or any ability for the government to, kind of serve and do good by their people. Then they get to turn around and say, look, this is what happens when the government tries to do a collective action, right? I mean, and they're pointing to the damage they did, obviously, but it creates a feedback loop where then people are kind of correct in thinking, yeah, well, I mean, the government's useless, like the public services are useless, and that's because of their degradation. But I don't know, it seems hard to get out of that loop.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, yeah, I think you were saying something very similar, Riley, but I guess the thing that kept on coming up to my mind while I was at this protest was it's really easy to laugh at just how silly some of this stuff is. It's so silly to say we're going to get this specific traffic filter means I'm going to get locked in my own home, or these cameras in this supermarket mean that I'm going to be monitored for how much meat I consume in a week and stuff. But I guess what frightens me the most is that the anxiety at the heart of the Great Reset is fundamentally not totally wrong, which is that Western society, and particularly, middle class to upper class people in Western societies, cannot keep consuming at the rate that they have been and expect the planet just to keep ticking along nicely, right? Like the demands of climate change do actually mean that we may have to see some like quite radical societal change, some societal restructuring. And I'm not even particularly confident that is going to happen. I'm not really confident that anyone is actually going to make that demand. But it's almost
Mr.
as
Beast,
if we
obviously.
have, apart from Climate Stalin, otherwise known as Mr. Beast. But I guess that's what frightens me, because nobody has made that demand. Nobody, is even pointing in the direction. Anyone with any power isn't even pointing in the direction of that demand. And yet there is already a resistance movement, and it's already pretty confident. It's pretty well organized, and it can bring a couple of thousand people out to Oxford, from all over the country before anything serious has actually happened. So yeah, I guess it's easy to point at the silliness, the science fiction part of it. But ultimately what we are seeing is a revitalized, confident, grassroots climate denial movement, I think.
What seems to be happening is that, like, there's kind of a lot of people that are very vulnerable to exploitation. And because, like, with a lot of these things, and, not just on, like, this issue, but when we talk about, like, conspiracy kind of movements generally, and, like, the kind of, like, followers on, what seems to be the case is that you have a lot of people who do feel that they've kind of, like, lost a lot, or they do feel like they kind of lack confidence, or like, lack optimism. There's a lot of, movement that is like motivated by an underlining sense of cynicism, the idea that nothing can get better, and like you should be suspicious of people who suggest that like that might be, especially if those people who are suggesting that things can get better kind of say that, well, in order to do so, we kind of need to do it collectively. And that also does involve a certain degree of sacrifice. And so you're sort of like, on the one hand, these types of conspiracy movements like play into those vulnerabilities. But I was also kind of wondering about the ways in which you kind of combat what is effectively like quite demonstrably like harmful misinformation. Because Riley, as you mentioned, like you can have all your like Snopes and fact checkers being like, you know, oh, the 15-minute city thing is like not real. And like, obviously there is not going to be any sort of like, you know, we do not have the police structure to kind of prevent people from leaving like, you know, within like a 15-mile radius or whatever. You can have all of that stuff, but the problem is that like the rate of which like conspiratorial content is produced online and the way in which is circulated. When I was thinking about like the 15-minute cities thing, and I was like looking at some of like local like Facebook groups and Nextdoor groups and stuff. What was really interesting is that you had a mixture of like things that were obviously just like misinformation from bullshit websites, like right-wing websites. But every so often you'd have like YouTube videos where you'd have someone from like, you know, what was it called? Not the Heritage Foundation, but
Heartland Foundation.
Yeah, like someone adjacent to that, or like an author there's an author who published a book quite recently about like in defense of fossil fuels. And he would kind of be on like your Rogans, and he would be on your sort of like seemingly kind of very professional podcasts, and they kind of work to reinforce each other. So I guess like my question is like, is this also like a rate of content type of thing where ultimately like your kind of like fact checking instruments are, the ways in which you would sort of usually try to combat misinformation just simply cannot work in an environment where the sort of on the other side you'd have like this constant and very well funded production of like material that works to counter that.
What's the fucking, as much as I hate to quote him, what's the Churchill line? The lie is halfway around the world before the truth has even got its boots on, right? Like, you can crank out videos of, you know, the guy buying the Twix getting rugby tackled through the plate glass window so easily. So easily. And, like, there's so many of them, and there's so many different, like, facets of conspiracy you can, like, sort of, like, lead people on down to. And so many different directions you can go with it. Whereas you've only got one, you know, very relatively boring truth, which is traffic calming measures in Oxfordshire, you know? You can kind of select the thing that interests you out of the conspiracy stuff. You can be like, it's because of, you know, this group of people or that group of people, and their secret agenda is to do this specific thing. As opposed to just like, you know, the council think that maybe they could make the traffic a bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that's true. But I guess I've thought a lot about, I mean, because even though the way that conspiracy politics can manifest themselves can feel very new, the truth is they're actually not that new. There have been conspiracy movements before, many of which have, which have resulted in protests and things like that. And yeah, when I was doing my work on the history of the vaccine podcast, I found out that, yeah, the smallpox vaccine, when that was first made mandatory, it like had such a huge backlash that basically Leicester city centre was burned to the ground pretty much.
No one can go to a store now.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, you know, this backlash to government measures like has happened before, and it's often revolved around, the idea they want us all killed, they want us all branded. And so even though I think misinformation is a problem, obviously in the digital environment, sometimes I think that politicians lean a bit too heavily on it, because there's another side to the equation, right? Which is that this kind of bullshit and stuff has always been around, but it doesn't work unless people believe it about you specifically. And I think that a little bit about, I think, you know, the internet and social media has given our public institutions and our government something to point at where they can say, you know, this is misinformation is the problem because all these people are reading all of this nonsense online. And while that's true, I sort of think, you know, looking at history, we can see that public trust in institutions goes up and down all the time. Do you know? But you have to build it back up, and it's hard work, and it's annoying, and it's often not considered to be, you know, good, slick, efficient politics. But you can rebuild public trust to the point where this misinformation doesn't interest them and it doesn't seem plausible about you because they don't think they're all the same or they're all in it for themselves and all of that sort of stuff. But it is like, it's just hard, boring work. And so I guess, even though this is the subject that I study, this is obviously something that I have an interest in and I think is a problem, I sometimes can get a little bored of the conversation around misinformation, as I think it's only half of the story.
They've sort of squandered a lot of that trust. And
Absolutely.
One of the ways in which they've done that is by not giving me a medal for each time I got vaccinated.
Yeah, they only gave you a cheap sticker.
Where
What
is
the
my
fuck?
brave boy badge?
I got
That's right.
I got a lollipop. I did actually get a lollipop because I was scared of needles.
Oh, did you?
And
Yeah, it was great.
What the hell?
I should have asked for a lollipop.
We're all going to go get the lollipops that we get for being brave little podcasters. I want to thank, first of all, Julian and Annie for coming on the show and talking to us today. This has been extremely interesting.
Thank you so much for having us.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, anytime.
And I want to remind all of you out there in Radioland that we have a Patreon. It's $5 a month. You can get more episodes, such as, for example, the bonus episodes, or you can get certain of the Britanology episodes, or certain of an upcoming first episode already recorded, ready to be released book club episode with
interesting.
a certain one familiar voice talking about books, and let's say a new voice talking about books.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm debuting my new Serbian accent. It's going to be very uncontroversial.
Yeah, that's right. And to say also, our theme song is "Here We Go" by Ginseng. Listen to it early, listen to it often. And
Milo might have some dates, but he's not here to tell you.
He's not here, so don't go to them. Anyway, we'll see you all on the bonus episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.